curious to know how many of you have gone through trauma. I, 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 I took this test called the ACEs test, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and I found out that I was heavily traumatized, and I didn't even know it. And what I learned about trauma is that it's really bad. It can kind of throw you off a lot in your decision making. And since we talk a lot about the economic side of things, I wanted to talk a little bit today about financial trauma responses, just what they look like, how to identify them, and more importantly, how to address it and fix it. I think that this thought was spurred because I saw a video where there was a woman who said something that was really interesting. Um, and probably true to for to some extent for sure, where she said that the best thing that black men can do to help black women heal is to heal themselves, right? So she was talking about relationships, and as you all know, money and relationships are deeply connected. That's I always tell y'all how I suddenly became handsome when I started making six figures. So money and relationships are deeply connected. Money is the number one cause of divorce and things like that. And she mentioned something that was true. And I said to my wife, I said, she's right. She's right. I said, everybody needs to heal, and hurt people, and trauma. And the worst thing to do when if you have healed is to be around somebody who hasn't, right? Because then they're only going to hurt you, and then you're going to have something else to heal from, right? It's almost like being muddy. Like everybody's born. A lot of us are born in the mud, and then you go take a shower and you get nice and clean and you're wearing a nice suit, and then somebody comes along and they just splash mud all over you. So now you're muddy again. And I agree with her statement. But one of the things that I thought about was I said, I think that that healing it's true for everybody, right? I think that I think what I said to my wife is I said, well, why don't we just say everybody needs to heal? Like what and maybe the assumption was for her that she's already healed, and I get that part, but it didn't sound like she was really talking about what she could personally do in terms of healing herself or choosing healed people to be around. And I told my wife, I said a more comprehensive way to look at this, in my opinion, would be to say, okay, first thing I'm gonna do if I want the world to heal, I'm gonna heal. You don't want to fall in that trap. I don't know if anybody's ever heard this saying where they say that everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. Give me a yes. How many of you have heard that statement before? If you haven't, let me know. I'd be curious to know how many of you have heard that. And I thought that was really profound. That everybody wants to change the world, but don't nobody want to change themselves. And I thought about that. I said that's so true. And there's a psychology theory connected to that kind of. We've talked about it a little bit called self-attribution bias. And self-attribution bias means that we tend to take responsibility for the good things we do, but we don't take responsibility for the bad things we do a lot of times. It's very easy to evade accountability when something bad happens because the world tells you that it's not your fault and that you're a victim and all that. And sometimes you are a victim, but sometimes we can go overboard with victimhood, and I'm not really sure. I took a let me just tell you, I thought that being a victim was gonna like actually help me pay some bills. So I went down to my landlord when I was 28, and I said, I don't got no money, but I got 20 pounds of victimhood. Will that pay the rent this month, sir? And he said, no, because victimhood doesn't pay bills, right? And then I went to the grocery store and I said, I can't afford your eggs, but I got a whole basket cart full of victimhood. Will that buy me some food today? And the grocer said no. I mean, because he probably racist. That's what he probably racist. And I every time I try to take this big bowl of victimhood, because they serve it by the pound, right? You go to any local politician, go to any, you listen to anybody who kind of, really wants you to stay right where you are. They'll give you lots of victimhood, but I found last time I checked, victimhood doesn't solve any problems, and it doesn't actually help you. It doesn't pay. You can't pay bills with victimhood. That's racism. That's what it is. And what I realized was I said, okay, maybe there's a better strategy. Maybe there's another way I can approach this. Maybe I can say, okay, I got the victimhood, but I know this ain't gonna pay no bills. So I'm gonna just put this victimhood over here, and I know it's there. I know I might have been a victim, but then I'm gonna grab a big old fat handful of accountability, and I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna carry that with me in my pocket. And what I found was that my accountability allowed me to realize a couple of things. That when it came to things like healing, it's before I start complaining about the world, I start looking at voice, right?